Hi, I'm Travis Graves, Director of Central Human Resources for Multnomah County. Being a hiring manager for Multnomah County is a big responsibility. Our success as an organization depends on our collective ability to make great hiring decisions. For many years, we've had a rigid view of what it takes to qualify for many of our positions. Unfortunately, this has resulted in the loss of some people from the applicant pool who could have been very successful. I invite you to take your time and really think about what you need at entry for the specific position that you're about to fill.
Hi, I'm Jane Williams. Throughout this video, you will meet several of my colleagues, all speaking about the importance of minimum qualifications at the county. Be sure to have the Minimum Qualifications Best Practices document handy. We will refer to it throughout this video. If you need to, you can download a copy from the link below.
I'm Mary Lee. I'm the Division Manager for the Community Services Division in the Department of County Human Services, and I served on the countywide working group that was a part of developing these new practices for minimum qualifications. We need to do a better job of getting as many candidates in the door as possible in order for us to have the best selection of the best qualified candidate. Minimum qualifications can either be a tool that helps promote that or can be a tool that creates barriers. The new practices are really aligned to ensure that we have the best opportunity of getting the most diverse candidates in the door from the very beginning.
Hi, my name is Vi Huyen and I am a recruiter for the Health Department. My job as a recruiter is to guide you through the recruitment and selection process. It's up to each recruiter and hiring manager to work together to ensure minimum qualifications are accurate and to remove any artificial barriers that can eliminate qualified and diverse candidates from the pool. So with minimum qualifications, we're not trying to identify the most qualified candidates or narrow the size of the applicant pool. At this stage, we're just simply removing the clearly unqualified candidates from the applicant pool, no more and no less. There will be other opportunities to identify the most qualified candidates. So, keep in mind, if minimum qualifications are overstated or too rigid, we run the risk of excluding capable and diverse job seekers from the applicant pool. Once we've filtered out an applicant, that person is out of the pool for good.
The best practices in this video will help you understand your role, the recruiter's role, and the tools that are available for identifying accurate minimum qualifications. Let's take a closer look at the important partnership between hiring manager and recruiter during the minimum qualifications process. First, the hiring manager will analyze the required duties and propose the minimum qualifications necessary for the position. The recruiter will act as a resource during this phase, providing support as needed. The hiring manager then updates the position description, which the recruiter will review and approve, including minimum qualifications. Both parties will participate in a planning meeting to prepare for the new search process. After the meeting, the recruiter will finalize the job announcement, which the hiring manager will review. They will both keep an eye on removing any potential barriers. The recruiter then conducts a minimum qualifications review of all applications. But when there's a question about qualifications, the hiring manager may be asked to review one or more of the applications.
I'm Bob Leake, Deputy Chief Information Officer for Multnomah County. As a hiring manager, I'm the subject matter expert when it comes to the work I need to be done on my teams. That's why I have primary responsibility to ensure the minimum qualifications are current and appropriate before filling a position. I'm going to do what I can to make sure the recruiter shares this understanding. We need to work together if we're going to attract, identify, and ultimately hire from a pool of diverse and qualified candidates. It really is a team effort.
In the identifying minimum qualifications phase, you'll examine the position very closely and develop a clear idea of what's actually essential to successfully perform a job at entry. When identifying minimum qualifications, the first thing you should do is make sure the position description is accurate, since it's the foundation of the entire search process. Either review the existing position description or create a new one. Next, it's a good idea to review the class specification for the position you want to fill. However, keep in mind, the minimum qualifications you determine for a given position may be different from the class specification. That's okay, you have this sort of flexibility, as long as the minimum qualifications you identify are based on job-related criteria, meaning they tie back to at least one essential job function, and are documented. For the sake of consistency, make sure that identical positions in your department share the same minimum qualifications. If you don't think that the minimum qualifications on the class specification are accurate for your position, you have the option to conduct your own job analysis. A job analysis involves studying a position and determining the key tasks and, by extension, the minimum qualifications needed for successful performance at entry. You can find a simple do-it-yourself job analysis worksheet in the appendix of the Minimum Qualifications Best Practices document. Your HR liaison is there to help you throughout this process.
Once I've drafted minimum qualifications for a position, I give them a thorough review to ensure they are accurate. First, I make sure the minimum qualifications relate to the essential functions of the job. For example, I wouldn't require job seekers to have a driver's license for a position that doesn't involve driving as a core duty, because such a requirement would artificially restrict the applicant pool and pose a barrier. Another strategy I employ to make sure we're getting the most qualified applicant pool involves thinking broadly about what's really needed to be considered qualified and avoiding unnecessary specific requirements. There are times when we're going to need applicants to have specific training, such as some of the more specialized roles. But for many of our positions, we recognize there may be a variety of different qualifying backgrounds.
I'd like to empower you to think critically and possibly differently about the positions that you manage. Take the time to reflect on what you really need in a new hire at entry. Once you've factored in all the on-the-job training and support you'll offer, you might discover you can broaden the minimum qualifications and include a greater number of qualified candidates as a result.
When I'm drafting minimum qualifications, I factor in training and experience a new hire will receive on the job. It's nice to know I have the flexibility to come up with my own minimum qualifications if necessary. Even though the class specification may suggest 2 years of previous experience for a position, when there's a great deal of on-the-job training, I know we can hire someone with the aptitude to learn, and experience isn't really necessary. By factoring in available training, I'm making sure we don't inadvertently exclude people with the greatest potential to make an impact once the orientation period is complete. Next, I try to separate the person who may have done the job previously from the position itself. For example, the former incumbent gained specialized knowledge over many years and really did a phenomenal job. But it isn't realistic for me to expect new hires to come in with this background from the get-go. I try to keep an open mind about the many different backgrounds capable candidates might have to be able to do this work at entry.
Your handbook has a more detailed description of each of these strategies to confirm the accuracy of your draft minimum qualifications. Once you've analyzed the position and determined the minimum qualifications, you'll need to update the position description with any changes. Be sure to send the updated position description and a job analysis worksheet, if you used one, to HR for finalization. It is a best practice for the recruiter and hiring manager to hold a planning meeting prior to launching a new candidate search process. The planning meeting can be in person or over the phone. During the planning meeting, you can confirm the needs of the job and plan out the logistics of the selection process.
When I have a vacancy to fill, like many hiring managers, I want to get that position filled as quickly as I can. But I've learned that I get a better result if I invest in planning up front and really take the time to identify the most accurate minimum qualifications for a position.
When I am able to be clear about what my needs are programmatically and organizationally and articulate that with a good recruiter who understands the technical processes of how to, ensure consistency and good practice across the county writ large, there is a wonderful partnership that occurs, and I believe that's when we get our best hiring processes conducted, and that's when we get our best people into the organization.
As a recruiter, it's typically my responsibility to draft the job announcement and write the minimum qualification as clearly and accurately as possible. Your recruiter may ask you to review the draft job announcement before it's considered final. Here are some questions designed to help you remove any artificial barriers that may exist. Can anything be modified to allow more qualified people to receive consideration for this opportunity? Is this announcement welcoming and inviting to all qualified job seekers? Is the announcement written in such a way to encourage qualified applicants across racial, ethnic, and generational lines? Is the announcement easily understood by all who may qualify? And finally, is anything limiting the ability of qualified individuals with disabilities to be considered with or without a reasonable accommodation?
It's typically the recruiter's role to evaluate applications against the predetermined minimum qualifications. However, there are times when you or another subject matter expert will take on this work. Evaluating applications takes some additional skills that are not covered here. Please be sure to connect with your recruiter if you find yourself in this situation.
HR is committed to continue to examine how our policies and practices may be an impediment to increasing our diversity. Therefore, I don't think there's a better place for us to focus our attention than the recruitment and selection of new county employees. So this isn't about lowering the minimum qualifications. Instead, it's about right-sizing them to ensure that we aren't inadvertently screening out an applicant who may be our next star employee. We want a recruitment and selection system that is free of bias and that's equitable for all. One of the ways that we can make a difference is through a critical examination of our minimum qualifications. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to participate in this training, and I'd like to also thank you in advance for thinking critically about how we approach minimum qualifications at Multnomah County.
It's important that we have a record you have completed this training. Please submit the short survey below so that we can update your training record.